Dwayne Johnson was in the first-class line, drawing attention, but not in the way you would expect. Dressed simply with a checkered shirt, worn jeans and boots marked by time, he was the complete opposite of the luxury surrounding him. While the people around him showcased elegant clothes and expensive luggage, he carried an old backpack as if he didn't care about appearances. But one particular detail made a man in the line cast him a disdainful look, one of those looks that clearly show silent judgment. What no one knew was that this seemingly ordinary moment would turn into something extraordinary. What happened next would leave the entire plane in shock, and someone's life would change forever. Before continuing with this thrilling story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you like inspiring stories like this, subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow, we'll bring you another special story you won't want to miss. In the meantime, imagine Los Angeles Airport, bustling as always, people coming and going, conversations echoing, bags sliding from one side to the other. And there, in the midst of the chaos, was he, calm, almost as if he didn't belong to the rush of that world. Dwayne Johnson, a man who seemed at peace while everyone around him was consumed by haste. And maybe that's why he went unnoticed, at least until that moment. Johnson was observing everything around him, as if he were absorbing every detail of that moment. He seemed immune to the judgmental looks and the stark contrast between his simplicity and the luxury dominating the environment. To him, none of it mattered. Right behind him in the line was Bruce Harding, a man who represented exactly the opposite. Bruce exuded ostentation, with his impeccably tailored suit, shoes shining like new, and a strong perfume that announced his arrival even before he spoke. Bruce was the type of person who turned every movement into a show, as if the entire world were an audience waiting to applaud him. His sharp eyes quickly scanned the line, evaluating each person as if deciding who was worthy of his attention. When his gaze landed on Johnson, he couldn't help but make a comment laced with sarcasm. "First class, huh?" said Bruce with a smile mixing irony and disdain. "You never know who might show up around here nowadays." Johnson slowly turned to face him, keeping the same serene expression he had since the beginning. "The world is full of surprises," he replied, with a disarming calmness. Bruce furrowed his brow, visibly annoyed. He seemed to expect something more, maybe a defensive reaction, something that would confirm the view he already had about the man in front of him. But Johnson remained silent, as if the comment held no weight. Bruce didn't seem willing to let the situation slide. He slightly tilted his head and insisted, with a laugh that almost sounded condescending. "Look, no offense, but you don't exactly look like the type who travels like this. It's rare to see someone so casual in first class." Johnson didn't react, maintaining the same serene and carefree look. No more words were exchanged between them, because at that moment, the boarding was announced. The first-class line started to move, and both Johnson and Bruce advanced with their tickets in hand. Bruce walked with long, confident strides, as if the aisle was a natural extension of his domain. Johnson, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to the hustle around him, keeping the same calm and measured pace. As the plane filled with passengers, they both headed for their respective seats. When Bruce reached the seat indicated on his ticket, he paused for a moment to double-check the number, perhaps thinking there was some mistake. But as he lifted his eyes, he saw Johnson calmly settling into the seat right next to him. "You've got to be kidding me," murmured Bruce, shaking his head in disbelief before sitting down with a resigned sigh. He let out a quiet, almost nervous laugh, as if the situation were a great irony. Of all the places, it had to be here. Johnson slowly turned his face in his direction, in no rush, and responded with a slight smile. His serene expression remained unchanged, as if he were completely immune to Bruce's evident discomfort. "Looks like we're traveling together then," Johnson said politely, with such a calm tone that only increased Bruce's discomfort. Bruce crossed his arms and looked away, trying to mask the unease he was feeling. It wasn't just the fact that he was sitting next to the man he had judged minutes earlier. It was the idea that someone as simple as Johnson occupied the same exclusive space as him. Something about the presence of that man unsettled him, as if there were an impenetrable calm that Bruce simply couldn't comprehend or ignore. After the economy-class passengers finished boarding, Bruce decided to break the silence, but his tone was far from friendly. On the contrary, it sounded like someone about to confirm a guess already made. "So, what do you do for a living?" he asked, leaning back in his seat with a slight cynical smile. Johnson, adjusting his backpack in the compartment in front of him, raised his gaze and replied simply, "I work in film." Bruce raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised, but didn't miss the chance to poke. "Oh, I see. Commercials? Smaller productions?" Johnson gave a slight smile, shaking his head. "Something like that, Bruce." Bruce leaned a little forward, as if he were about to give a lesson. "I've always found it interesting how people try to find their place, you know. But sometimes some places just aren't for everyone. Like first class, for example." Johnson remained silent for a moment, watching him. He seemed to be evaluating Bruce's words, but his expression didn't change. "I think we all have our place," he replied calmly. "And sometimes it's exactly where we are. Here's a revised version, more engaging and fluid, with the necessary adjustments to enhance emotional connection and clarity." Bruce let out a short laugh. "That's good. Kind of philosophical even. But real life, isn't that simple?" Johnson didn't respond immediately. He just turned his face to the window, as if the conversation had come to an end. But Bruce wasn't ready to close it. He leaned slightly in Johnson's direction, with a look that combined superiority and self-satisfaction. "You know what?" Bruce said with a low voice but loaded with intention. "You may be sitting here, but there are things money can't buy. Some places will never truly belong to certain people." Johnson remained silent, but this time he didn't look away. He stared at Bruce for a few seconds, with an expression that combined patience and subtle firmness. It was the kind of look that spoke more than any response could. A look that seemed to say, "You're wasting your time." Bruce, thinking he had gotten the upper hand, leaned back in his seat with a satisfied smile. He believed he was in control of the situation, but the truth was different. Johnson's unwavering calm hid something Bruce could never predict. The conversation, which had seemed casual until then, was turning into something much bigger, and Bruce didn't even suspect it. With the plane already in the air, the in-flight service began. The flight attendant passed through first class, offering drinks. Bruce, as always, made a point of drawing attention. "A glass of champagne, please." His voice sounded loud and confident, as if he wanted to reaffirm his position in the environment. "Something that matches the exclusivity of this seat," Bruce said with a confident smile, glancing sideways at Johnson while placing his order. The flight attendant, accustomed to dealing with demanding passengers, responded with a professional smile and noted the order. Bruce adjusted himself in his seat, clearly satisfied with himself. When the flight attendant turned to Johnson, he made an order that seemed to completely clash with the environment around him. "Just water, please," he said simply. Bruce, of course, didn't miss the opportunity. He chuckled softly and looked at Johnson as if observing something curious and out of place. "Water?" he asked, still laughing. "Seriously, you're going to waste the experience of flying in first class by ordering water?" Johnson received the bottle the flight attendant handed him, thanked her with a slight nod, and responded with the same calm that seemed to irritate Bruce more with each passing second. "I'm fine with that. Sometimes simplicity is enough." Bruce raised an eyebrow, analyzing the response for a moment, as if trying to understand what Joson really meant. After a short pause, he decided he still had something to add. "Yeah, I imagine that works for those who settle for less. After all, not everyone is born to enjoy the best life has to offer, right?" Joson remained calm. He lifted the bottle of water, took a small sip, and stayed silent for a few seconds, as if reflecting on what to say, or whether it was worth responding. Other passengers in first class, who until then had not paid much attention, began to notice the growing tension. Bruce's provocative tone was evident, but Joson's indifference seemed to both bewilder and intrigue. Finally, Joson looked at Bruce and said, with an unshakable serenity, "Maybe the best is different for each person." Bruce blinked a few times, clearly disturbed by the response. He reclined in his seat, letting out a long sigh as he tried to hide his growing irritation. But his expression made it clear he wasn't enjoying losing control of the conversation. "Or maybe the people who say that have never really understood what's important," Bruce said, leaning forward as if wanting to ensure Joson didn't miss a word. "Some things are simply out of reach for certain people, you know." The flight attendant, who was serving another nearby passenger, cast a discreet glance in their direction. She seemed to consider intervening, but upon seeing Joson's calm demeanor, decided to continue with her duties. Joson didn't respond immediately. He gave just a slight smile and turned back to look out the window, as if the conversation was no longer more important than the view outside. Bruce, however, seemed unsatisfied. He wanted to provoke more, wanted to elicit a reaction, but Joson's serenity made this almost impossible. While Bruce believed he was dominating the situation, the passengers around them began to think differently. His attitude was becoming uncomfortable, while Joson's calm created a striking contrast. Little did Bruce know that he was about to face a reality that would completely change his perspective on people. The flight attendant returned to the aisle where Joson and Bruce were seated, serving another round of drinks. Bruce saw this as a new opportunity to continue his series of provocations. "You know," he started, gesturing with a glass of champagne in hand, "life is like flying first class. You work hard, earn your place, and then you can enjoy. But some people seem to be here just by luck." Joson, who until then had been holding the water bottle on the tray, finally turned to face Bruce. His gaze was calm, but there was something different this time. It was as if he had decided it was time to respond more directly. "Luck or hard work, in the end, we all end up in the same place. That's what matters, right?" Joson said, in a serene but firm tone. The words hung in the air for a moment, carrying a meaning that seemed to go far beyond the conversation itself. The passengers around them, who had previously only cast curious glances, were now attentive, captivated by the unfolding dialogue. The cabin became so quiet that even the sound of the engine seemed louder. A few passengers exchanged furtive glances, realizing that something was happening between the two men. Bruce smiled, but it was a tense smile, clearly trying to mask the impact of Joson's words. "Well, I wouldn't say that." He leaned slightly forward, crossing his arms in a gesture of false confidence. "Some of us are on a higher level, you know. Not everyone understands the true value of being here." Joson observed Bruce for a moment, his eyes calm but intense. He made a sweeping gesture, indicating the seat around them, before responding serenely. "I think the value of being here has nothing to do with what you own. It's about how you treat other people." The phrase landed like a stone in a still lake, reverberating through the cabin. The impact was instantaneous. Some passengers nodded discreetly, while others exchanged approving glances, clearly connected to the simplicity and depth of the response. Bruce, however, couldn't disguise his discomfort. He tried to laugh, but his voice seemed a little louder than necessary, a clear reflection of his nervousness. "That's good. First-class self-help philosophy. Maybe you should consider giving motivational speeches." Bruce's sarcastic tone sounded forced, almost like a desperate attempt to regain control, but Johnson didn't bite. He simply gave a brief smile, without a trace of irritation or anger, and turned to look ahead, ending the conversation without saying anything more. And it was that silence that truly marked the moment. Johnson's unshakable calm seemed to speak louder than any response he could have given. Around them, the passengers began to react subtly. Whispers spread through the cabin, some casting disapproving glances at Bruce. A couple sitting a few rows behind, who had clearly recognized Johnson, exchanged a knowing smile. They respected his privacy, but couldn't hide their admiration for how he handled the situation. Bruce, on the other hand, began to shift uncomfortably in his seat, realizing that the tacit support of the cabin was not in his favor. Bruce began to notice that he was being watched, and not in a positive way. His posture, once so confident, began to falter. There was something in the exchanged glances among the passengers that made him feel uncomfortable, but he wasn't ready to admit he had lost control of the situation. He still believed he was winning, but the reactions around him told a different story. Unknowingly, he was about to be challenged in a way that would make him question everything he believed about status, power, and respect. When the flight attendant passed by collecting empty glasses, Bruce, determined to continue his line of thought, resumed the conversation. "You know what's funny?" he said, trying to keep the provocative tone. "People who have nothing to show always talk about things like humility and simplicity. Have you noticed that?" Johnson, with his usual calm, leaned slightly forward. His eyes met Bruce's, and he said, in a calm but firm voice, "I've noticed that sometimes the people who talk the most about what they have are the ones who feel emptiest inside." Johnson's words hung in the air, and for a moment, Bruce seemed stunned, as if trying to process the impact of what was said. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come immediately. The passengers around them, who had previously been watching from a distance, were now paying closer attention. Some exchanged surprised glances, while others, clearly impressed with Johnson's response, tried to hide a smile. Finally, Bruce regained his composure and tried to continue the conversation. "Look, I don't want to be rude, but the world is competitive, you know. If you don't show what you've got, people will ignore you. That's how things work." Johnson, with unshakable serenity, leaned back in his chair and responded, "Maybe, but I think true success doesn't need to be shouted. It speaks for itself." His words resonated throughout the cabin. Some passengers, visibly moved by the depth of his response, nodded discreetly, while others cast disapproving glances at Bruce. The air was charged with the sense that the battle of egos had shifted. The atmosphere in business class was now tense. Many of the passengers were clearly focused on the exchange between Johnson and Bruce. An older man sitting nearby turned discreetly to watch more closely, shaking his head as if disapproving of Bruce's behavior. Bruce, feeling the eyes upon him, tried to hide his irritation. However, instead of staying silent, he decided to launch another provocation. "Cheap philosophy," he said with a forced smile. "It may sound nice, but the real world doesn't work like that." Johnson, as always, maintained his calm. With a serene expression, he responded, "The real world is made up of people, Bruce, and in the end, how we treat others says more about who we are than anything else." Johnson's response left Bruce visibly uncomfortable. He looked around, now realizing that the passengers were no longer just listening, but truly paying attention to the conversation. Some whispered among themselves, while others watched directly, with looks ranging from curiosity to disapproval. Bruce's perception of the situation began to change. He no longer seemed to be in control. He still believed he was winning, but now irritation began to take over, and the strategy of dominating the conversation didn't seem as effective. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Bruce, trying to regain his composure, crossed his arms, but couldn't hide his growing discomfort. Josen's words had hit a nerve, and his reaction was becoming more and more visible to everyone around. Josen, however, seemed completely indifferent to the growing tension around him. With the same calm as ever, he turned directly to Bruce and broke the silence with a calm voice. "You know, Bruce, I understand what you're saying. The world is competitive, I know that. But over time, I've learned that often this need to prove something to others comes from a deeper place." Bruce furrowed his brow, confused. He didn't know if he was being provoked or if Josen was just trying to have a sincere conversation. "Insecurity, an internal struggle?" he asked, laughing, as if the idea were absurd. "I don't know where you got that story from, but you're completely wrong." Josen just smiled softly, shaking his head lightly. "Maybe, but I've met many people who thought success was only about what others saw. Deep down, they were just trying to fill something that was missing inside them." Josen's words hit Bruce in an unexpected way. For a moment, he fell silent, distractedly fiddling with his wedding ring, clearly thrown off balance. But soon he regained his composure and returned to a defensive tone. "That has nothing to do with me. Everything I've achieved, I fought hard for. And I don't need anyone to tell me how to live my life." Josen remained calm, observing Bruce for a few seconds, as if carefully choosing his next words. "I'm not saying you didn't work hard, Bruce. I just think that sometimes we get so caught up in showing what we've achieved that we forget to look inside ourselves. Who are we without all of this?" Bruce pressed his lips, clearly uncomfortable. The question hung in the air, echoing in his mind, but he wasn't ready to admit that it had touched a sensitive part of his life. "Who are we?" he responded with a sarcastic laugh. "We are what we build. Without that, we are nothing." Josen kept his gaze steady, his expression now more serious. "I disagree. I think we're defined by what we do for others, not by what we accumulate. In the end, what we show to the world matters less than what we carry inside us." He made a gesture, pointing to his chest, and his words seemed to echo through the cabin. A few passengers discreetly nodded, while Bruce appeared to struggle to maintain his calm. "That's easy for you to say," Bruce said, almost standing up from his seat. "You have no idea what I've been through to get here." Josen responded firmly, but without raising his voice. "You're right, I don't know your story, but I don't think I need to know it to realize that sometimes, when someone feels the need to shout about what they've achieved, it's because they're trying to hide something. Fear, insecurity, loneliness." The words fell like a blow, and Bruce froze, his face flushed with anger, perhaps shame. Bruce clenched his fists, visibly fighting the urge to explode. Finally, he lost his composure and stood up abruptly, knocking his empty champagne glass to the floor. "You think you're better than me?" he shouted, drawing the attention of everyone in the cabin. "You sit there with your pretty phrases, acting like you know everything about life, but you don't know anything about what it's like to live in the real world." The airplane fell into an absolute silence. All eyes were now on him. The flight attendant rushed to intervene, trying to calm the situation. Josen remained seated, with the same unshakable calm, waiting for Bruce to calm down before responding. "I don't think I'm better than you," Josen said in a firm but gentle tone. "I just think that sometimes we need to stop and reflect on what really matters. And Bruce, you don't need to prove anything to anyone." The words landed heavily on Bruce. He breathed irregularly, but something in Josen's calmness made him sit back down, his gaze averted, looking more defeated than angry. Silence hung between them as Josen's words echoed in Bruce's mind. He had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable in front of so many people, but the worst, or perhaps the best, was yet to come. The flight continued in a denser silence, while Bruce remained in his seat, avoiding any eye contact with Josen. It was clear that the words had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. Josen, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease, as if nothing had happened. And now, if you've made it this far, I want to know, from which city are you watching this story? Leave a comment. We'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Soon after, the flight attendant approached, drawing the attention of everyone in the cabin with a professional smile. "Mr. Reeves, the captain asked me to inform you that your connection in Tokyo is confirmed. He also sends his best regards." The name Reeves echoed through first class. Some passengers, who had been silently watching, now widened their eyes. A murmur began to spread through the cabin. It was at that moment that Bruce froze. "Reeves," he murmured, almost unbelieving. Josen politely waved at the flight attendant and thanked her, unaffected by the commotion around him. He slowly turned to Bruce, who was staring at him with a look of sheer disbelief. "Something wrong?" Josen asked, with a slight smile on his face. Bruce tried to speak, but the words simply wouldn't come out. He looked around, feeling the curious, even disapproving gazes of the other passengers. He seemed completely lost, not knowing what to do or say. He sank further into his seat, clearly uncomfortable. He tried to justify his words, but his defense seemed fragile. I didn't know. I mean, you didn't tell me who you were." He stammered, trying to explain himself. "I didn't know you were you." Josen, maintaining his calm, responded with subtle firmness. "I didn't think it was necessary. I don't usually use my name as a business card." Bruce, for a moment, fell silent, trying to understand the situation, but the need to justify himself made him speak again. "Look, I didn't want to offend you. I just didn't know who I was talking to." Josen let out a small sigh and leaned slightly forward, his words now more direct. "Bruce, what you said doesn't change now that you know my name. The truth doesn't depend on who's in front of you. It depends on how you choose to treat people." Josen's words hit Bruce like a bullseye. He looked at Josen, then at the other passengers, who were now visibly more focused on the conversation. The humiliation on his face couldn't have been clearer. The cabin was in a heavy silence when Josen decided to end the exchange. Meanwhile, Bruce remained still, his eyes fixed on his hands, as if he were trying to process every word Josen had said. He hadn't just been confronted by Josen, but by reality itself. With every thought, he realized that, in trying to humiliate someone else, he had exposed more about himself than he ever imagined. The rest of the flight was marked by a heavy silence. Bruce, who had once seemed to dominate the space, was now visibly uncomfortable. He could barely look into Josen's or the other passengers' eyes. The arrogance that once accompanied him had disappeared, replaced by a feeling of shame, which slowly engulfed him. As the minutes passed, Josen's words echoed in his mind. Everything he said. It seemed so simple, yet at the same time, it had a weight that sank deeply into his consciousness. Bruce found himself questioning his own actions, remembering all the times he judged people without even trying to understand them. "Maybe he's right," he murmured to himself without realizing. His eyes turned to Josen, who was calmly reading a book, as if nothing had happened, and that only amplified the impact of the situation. Josen didn't make any effort to prove himself. He simply let his actions speak for him. When the plane began to prepare for landing, Bruce finally found the courage to apologize. He turned to Josen, his eyes lowered, and said, "I need to apologize, not for what I said, but because I was arrogant. I acted like an idiot." Josen looked at him with the same calm expression as always, waiting for a moment before responding. "I appreciate the apology. But more than that, I hope you learn from it." Bruce nodded slowly, feeling that those words offered an opportunity for change. Then Josen continued, his voice firm and calm. "Sometimes, what we seek most in the world is what's missing inside us. I hope you find out what really matters." Bruce remained silent, but those words stayed with him, like a beacon that illuminated a new perspective. He knew that this moment had the power to change something inside him, if he allowed it. After disembarking, Bruce stood still in the terminal, watching Josen walk toward the exit. He saw fans discreetly approaching, asking for autographs and photos. Josen greeted each one with patience and a genuine smile, without hurry, without arrogance. It was clear that his simplicity and kindness came from within. Bruce looked at his own hands, sighing. He knew he needed to change. Josen's words still echoed in his mind, a reminder that a person's true value isn't in what they achieve or display, but in how they choose to treat others. As Josen disappeared into the airport crowd, Bruce felt something new: hope. Maybe that encounter hadn't been a coincidence. Maybe it was a chance to start over. In the end, we all carry choices that shape who we are. Are we living to impress others or to become better people? Josen's words continued to reverberate. True success isn't in what you achieve, but in the positive impact you leave on the world and in the lives of the people around you. So, the next time you find yourself in a situation of judgment or conflict, remember, respect and humility never go out of style, and maybe the change you want to see in the world needs to start with you. So, what did you think of this story? If it touched you in any way, don't forget to leave your like and share it with those who need to hear this. Oh, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos. Here, we always have more stories to warm the heart and change perspectives. See you in the next video.